The Dominion had ruled the Orion sector for 12,000 years. Their empire stretched across hundreds of star systems, and their fleets numbered in the millions. Every species they encountered had two choices: bow down or be destroyed. Most chose to bow. The few who resisted became examples, their worlds turned to ash and their names erased from history. So when deep space probes detected strange radio signals coming from a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, High Commander saw it as nothing special. Just another primitive species waiting to be conquered. Just another world to add to the Dominion's endless collection. The humans, as they called themselves, had only recently learned to travel between stars. Their ships were slow and clumsy. Their weapons were weak. Their numbers were tiny compared to the vast populations of the Dominion. Studied the reports from his scouts and felt nothing but contempt. These creatures were barely worth the effort of conquest. But protocol was protocol. The Dominion always offered a chance to surrender before unleashing destruction. It was not mercy. It was efficiency. Dead slaves could not work. Burned worlds could not produce resources. The emissary ship arrived at Earth's orbital station on a cold morning in March. The vessel was enormous, casting a shadow over the human station like a whale swimming past a minnow. Inside, Ambassador waited with barely hidden impatience. He had delivered this message 100 times to 100 species. The response was always the same: fear, panic, submission. Ambassador Perkins met him in the station's main conference room. She was a tall woman in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that had seen too much. Before becoming a diplomat, she had served 20 years in the Marines. She had fought in 3 wars and buried more friends than she cared to remember. Nothing scared her anymore. Towered over her by nearly 2 feet, his skin was the color of dried blood, and his 4 eyes studied her with cold curiosity. When he spoke, his voice sounded like stones grinding together. "I speak for the Dominion," he said. "Your species has been noticed. Your worlds have been claimed. You will surrender all military assets and submit to Dominion rule. Your people will serve the Empire. Your resources will feed the Empire. This is not a request. This is a statement of fact." Listened without expression. When finished, she nodded slowly. "I understand," she said. "I need to consult with my government. Give us 48 hours to prepare our response." His 4 eyes narrowed. "You have 12 hours. Use them wisely." After the emissary left, sat alone in the conference room for a long time. Through the window, she could see Earth floating in the darkness. Blue oceans, white clouds, green continents, 8 billion people going about their lives, unaware that their entire existence now hung by a thread. She thought about her granddaughter, who was just learning to walk. She thought about her son, who worked as a teacher in Seattle. She thought about all the ordinary people on all the ordinary streets who had no idea what was coming. Then she straightened her shoulders and went to deliver the news. The emergency session of the United Earth Council lasted exactly 3 hours. Every nation, every leader, every military commander heard the ultimatum. The debate was fierce but brief. Some argued for surrender. Better to live as slaves than die as free people. Others demanded resistance, regardless of the cost. In the end, it came down to a simple question: what kind of species did humanity want to be? The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Earth would not surrender. Earth would fight. Returned to the conference room where waited with growing irritation. He had expected weeping. He had expected begging. Instead, he found a woman who looked at him with something he had never seen in a conquered species before. Defiance. "I have our response," said. She held out a small data chip. "Please deliver this to High Commander." Took the chip and inserted it into his translator device. The message was short, just 4 words in the tongue. "Come and take it." For a moment, could not process what he was seeing. No species had ever refused submission. No species had ever been foolish enough to challenge the Dominion. He looked at with something approaching disbelief. "You understand what this means?" he asked. "Your world will burn, your people will die, your entire species will be erased from existence." Smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "Maybe," she said, "but we won't make it easy for you." High Commander received the message aboard his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. When his translator parsed the human response, he actually laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound that echoed through the command deck. His officers looked at each other in confusion. "They refuse," said, still chuckling. "These insects actually refuse." He leaned back in his command chair and considered his options. The humans were no threat. Their fleet was pathetic. Their defenses were laughable. He could send a single battle group and wipe them out in a matter of hours. But where was the lesson in that? No, the other species of the galaxy needed to see what happened when primitives the Dominion. They needed to see the humans burn. They needed to remember why submission was the only choice. "Send the Third Fleet," ordered. "All 800 ships. I want this done loudly. I want every species in the sector to see what we do to those who resist." The Third Fleet assembled at the edge of space. 800 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. 50,000 fighters, 2 million soldiers, veterans of a dozen conquests, hungry for another victory. They jumped into hyperspace, confident in their superiority, certain of their triumph. On Earth, the warning came 3 hours before the fleet arrived. Deep space sensors detected the hyperspace signatures and calculated the enemy's trajectory. 3 hours. That was all the time humanity had to prepare for the greatest battle in its history. Admiral Price stood in the command center of the orbital defense station, watching the countdown clock tick toward zero. Around her, officers worked with calm efficiency, preparing systems, coordinating fleets, doing everything possible to squeeze every advantage from their limited resources. The human fleet was small, 87 warships, most of them barely worthy of the name, a handful of carriers, some destroyers, a few cruisers held together by duct tape and determination. Against 800 warships they had no chance. But had studied history. She knew that battles were not always won by the stronger force. Sometimes they were won by the more determined one. "All hands," she said into the fleet-wide comm. "The enemy is coming. They think we are weak. They think we will break. Today we show them how wrong they are. Today we fight for our homes. We fight for our families. We fight for our right to exist. Whatever happens in the next few hours, know that you stand among heroes. Now get to your stations. We have a war to win." The countdown clock reached zero, and the sky filled with fire. The Third Fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. 800 warships spread across the darkness like a swarm of angry insects. Their weapons powered up. Their shields hummed with energy. 2 million soldiers stood ready to crush another primitive species beneath the boot of the Dominion. Fleet Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Wrath of, and surveyed the battlefield. Earth hung in the distance, blue and fragile. Between his fleet and that helpless world floated the pitiful human defense force, 87 ships. He almost felt sorry for them. "Almost. Begin the assault," he ordered. "Standard conquest formation. I want this finished within the hour." The fleet moved forward with practiced precision. They had done this 100 times before. The pattern was always the same. Overwhelm the defenders, destroy their fleet, bombard the planet until resistance collapsed, collect the survivors as slaves, move on to the next conquest. But something was wrong. The human ships were not retreating. They were not forming defensive lines. They were not doing any of the things that conquered species always did. Instead, they were spreading out, breaking into small groups, accelerating toward the formation at attack speed. Captain Danny gripped the arms of his command chair aboard the carrier Resolute. His ship was old and outdated, held together by welds and prayers. His crew was exhausted from days of emergency preparation. His weapons were crude compared to technology. None of that mattered. "All fighters launch," he ordered. "Attack pattern Omega, target their command ships." 200 fighters screamed out of the Resolute's launch bays. They were small and fast, designed for speed rather than durability. Each one carried a single heavy torpedo, enough to crack the armor of a cruiser if it hit the right spot. The fleet had never faced an enemy that attacked first. They had never encountered a species stupid enough to charge into superior firepower. Their gunners hesitated, confused by the unexpected aggression. That hesitation cost them. Lieutenant Commander Maria led her squadron straight into the heart of the enemy formation. Her fighter shook violently as point defense guns tried to track her movements. Warning lights flashed across her console. Her shields were failing. Her engines were overheating. She did not care. "Fox 1, she called, releasing her torpedo at a dreadnought. "Splash 1. The torpedo struck the dreadnought's engine section and detonated. The massive ship shuddered, its rear section erupting in flame. It was not a kill, but it was a wound. And wounded ships made mistakes. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human fighters dove into the formation, trading their lives for damage. Human destroyers rammed enemy cruisers, their crews evacuating seconds before impact. Human marines launched boarding pods at warships, fighting hand-to-hand in corridors not designed for creatures their size. Fleet Commander watched his tactical display with growing disbelief. His fleet was winning, of course. They were destroying human ships at a ratio of 10 to 1, but the humans were not breaking. They were not running. They were fighting with a ferocity he had never witnessed. "What are they doing?" he demanded. "Why don't they surrender?" His tactical officer had no answer. On the Resolute, Captain watched his fleet being torn apart. Half his ships were already gone. The rest were damaged, bleeding atmosphere and crew into the void. The battle was barely 30 minutes old and humanity was losing. But they were not losing as badly as they expected. "Sir," his sensor officer called out. "Enemy flagship identified. The Wrath of bearing 275, distance 40,000 kilometers." Studied the tactical display. The enemy flagship was enormous, bristling with weapons, surrounded by escort vessels. Attacking it directly would be suicide. He smiled grimly. Suicide was exactly what he had in mind. "Signal all remaining ships," he ordered. "New target, the enemy flagship, everything we have." The remnants of the human fleet turned as one and charged toward the Wrath of. They were battered and bleeding, but they were not finished. Not yet. Maria's fighter had taken heavy damage during her first attack run. Her shields were gone. Her weapons were empty. Her port engine was on fire. She should have retreated, found a carrier, rearmed and repaired. Instead, she aimed her fighter at a cruiser, blocking the path to the enemy flagship. "Resolute this is," she transmitted. "My weapons are dry, but I still have one torpedo left, my ship." "Maria, no," came the response from the Resolute's flight controller. "Pull back, that's an order." "Negative control. I didn't sign up to run away." She pushed her throttle to maximum and felt her fighter surge forward. The cruiser filled her viewport, growing larger with every second. She could see the flash of its guns trying to shoot her down. She could feel her hull starting to buckle from the stress. At the last moment she ejected. Her fighter struck the cruiser's bridge at full speed. The explosion tore through the enemy ship, ripping it in half. Maria tumbled through space in her ejection pod, watching the debris scatter across the void. "Splash 2, she whispered. The sacrifice opened a hole in the formation. The surviving human ships poured through, guns blazing, headed straight for the enemy flagship. Fleet Commander finally understood what he was facing. These humans were not just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. They were willing to die, willing to sacrifice everything, just to hurt their enemy. For the first time in his long career, felt something he had never experienced before. Veer. All ships fall back, he ordered. Regroup at the outer planets. His officers stared at him in shock. They did not retreat. They did not show weakness, but had made his decision. Better to retreat and regroup than lose his flagship to these insane creatures. The fleet began to withdraw, still firing, still destroying human ships, but moving backward. The humans pursued, snapping at their heels like wolves chasing wounded prey. When the battle finally ended, the Third Fleet had been reduced from 800 ships to 73. The survivors fled back to space, leaving behind a field of wreckage and the bodies of 1 million dead soldiers. The human losses were terrible. Of their 87 ships, only 12 remained operational. Thousands of pilots, sailors, and marines had given their lives. Earth's orbital defense stations were shattered. The planet itself was by debris impacts. But they had won. Admiral Price stood on the observation deck of the orbital command station, watching rescue ships search the debris field for survivors. Her uniform was stained with smoke and blood. Her eyes were red from exhaustion, but there was steel in her voice when she addressed the surviving fleet. "Today we proved something," she said. "We proved that humanity will not go quietly into the night. We proved that we will fight for our right to exist. The thought we were prey. They were wrong. We are predators, and this war has just begun." Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread faster than any ship could travel. Species that had lived under rule for generations heard about the small blue planet that had fought back. They heard about the humans who had refused to surrender. And for the first time they began to hope. The news traveled across 1,000 star systems in a matter of days. Traders carried it. Smugglers whispered it. Slaves passed it from ear to ear in hushed voices. The Third Fleet had been destroyed. 800 warships reduced to 73. An entire army wiped out by a species no one had ever heard of. The humans had won. On the High Commander faced the fury of the Supreme Council. The chamber was vast and dark, lit only by the glow of holographic displays showing the faces of the 12 council members. Each one was ancient, powerful, and absolutely furious. "Explain this failure," demanded council leader. "Explain how a primitive species with pathetic technology defeated our finest fleet." Stood before them with his head bowed. He had no explanation. He had studied the battle records 100 times and still he could not understand what had happened. The humans should have been crushed. The mathematics were simple. 800 ships against 87. There was no scenario where the humans should have won. But they had. "The humans fight differently," said carefully. "They do not value their own lives. They sacrifice themselves willingly to damage our ships. They board our vessels and fight in close quarters where our superior technology means nothing. They are unpredictable." "Unpredictable," council leader's voice dripped with contempt. "You lost 800 ships to an unpredictable enemy. You are a disgrace to the Dominion." Before could respond, 2 guards stepped forward and seized his arms. He did not struggle. He knew what was coming. Failure in the Dominion was punished with death. "Supreme Admiral will take command of the war," announced. "The humans will be destroyed. Their world will be burned. Their name will be erased from history. This I promise." Was dragged from the chamber. He would be dead within the hour. Supreme Admiral was everything had not been. Cautious, patient, thorough. He did not underestimate enemies and he did not make assumptions. When he received command of the human war, his first action was to gather intelligence. What he learned disturbed him deeply. The humans had spent their entire existence fighting each other. Their history was a long list of wars, conflicts, and struggles. They had invented weapons designed to kill their own kind. They had developed tactics for every type of combat imaginable. They had perfected the art of warfare in ways that no other species in the galaxy could match. And now, for the first time, they had stopped fighting each other. Now they were united against a common enemy. We cannot defeat them with numbers alone, told his staff officers. We must be smart, we must be patient, we must learn their weaknesses and exploit them. While they prepared for a long war, humanity was doing the same. On Earth, the celebration of victory lasted exactly one day. Then the work began. Every factory was converted to military production. Every shipyard worked around the clock building new warships. Every citizen who could serve was drafted into the defense forces. Admiral Price was promoted to Supreme Commander of all human military forces. She established her headquarters on Mars, far from Earth, in a bunker carved deep beneath the red planet's surface. From there, she coordinated the greatest military buildup in human history. We won the first battle, she told her senior officers. But the war has just started. They will come back. They will come back with more ships, more soldiers, more weapons. And next time they will not underestimate us. She pulled up a holographic display of the galaxy. Red dots marked territory, stretching across hundreds of star systems. Blue dots marked human space, a tiny cluster around a single unremarkable star. We are small, continued. We are weak. We are outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1, but we have something they don't have. We have the will to win, and we have something else. She pressed a button and new dots appeared on the display. Green dots scattered throughout space. Allies. The consortium of free worlds had existed for centuries, a loose alliance of species that had resisted conquest. They survived by hiding, by running, by staying beneath the Dominion's notice. They had never been strong enough to fight back. Until now. Ambassador Perkins traveled to the consortium's hidden headquarters aboard a small, fast ship. The journey took 3 weeks through dangerous space, dodging patrols and navigating uncharted jump routes. When she finally arrived, she found representatives of a dozen species waiting for her. They were strange creatures, these aliens. Some had too many limbs. Some had no limbs at all. Some communicated through sound, others through light, others through chemical signals. But they all shared one thing in common. They all hated the... We have watched your battle, said the consortium speaker, a tall creature with silver skin and 6 arms. We have seen what your people can do. We wish to help. Nodded slowly. What can you offer? Information, technology, resources. We have studied them for centuries. We know their weaknesses. We know their secrets. We know how to hurt them. And what do you want in return? The speaker's 6 arms spread wide in a gesture that might have been a shrug. We want what you want, freedom, the chance to live without fear, the end of the Dominion. Smiled. It was the same smile she had shown the emissary, cold and dangerous. Then I think we can work together. Over the following months, the alliance took shape. Consortium scientists shared their knowledge of technology with human engineers. Doctor led a team that reverse-engineered captured enemy weapons, improving upon designs that had remained unchanged for. Human ships grew faster, stronger, and more deadly. Meanwhile, Commander Sam Martinez was building something new. His unit was called the Shadow Corps, a team of special operators trained for missions behind enemy lines. They learned language, culture, and psychology. They studied enemy security systems and military protocols. They prepared for a kind of warfare the galaxy had never seen. We're not just going to fight them ship to ship, Sam explained to his team. We're going to fight them everywhere, in their bases, in their factories, in their homes. We're going to make them afraid to sleep. They expected a conventional war. They expected fleets clashing in space, planets being conquered, resources being captured. They did not expect what was coming. Supreme Admiral assembled his forces with careful precision. He built a fleet of 2,000 ships, crewed by veterans and equipped with the best weapons the Dominion could produce. He planned his campaign meticulously, accounting for every variable. But he did not account for one thing. He did not account for humanity's creativity. 1 year after the first battle, the Second Human War began, and nothing would ever be the same again. 5 years had passed since the first ship entered human space. 5 years of blood and fire. 5 years of death on a scale that no human had ever imagined. The galaxy had become a battlefield, and humanity had become something new. Something dangerous. Supreme Admiral stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Dominion's Fury, and studied the war map with growing frustration. 5 years ago, he had commanded the largest fleet in history. 2,000 warships, ready to crush the human insects once and for all. Now half of those ships were gone, not destroyed in glorious battle but picked apart piece by piece, ambushed in supply convoys, sabotaged in their own shipyards, hunted down in the darkness between stars. The humans did not fight like any enemy they had ever faced. They did not form battle lines. They did not follow the rules of civilized warfare. They struck from shadows and disappeared before retaliation could come. They turned their own subjects against them. They spread chaos and fear wherever they went. "Another convoy destroyed," reported his tactical officer. 40 transport ships, 3 escort cruisers, all hands lost. Closed his 4 eyes and tried to calm his racing hearts. Where did the attack come from? "Unknown, Admiral. The human ships were gone before our reinforcements arrived." This was the pattern, always the same. The humans appeared from nowhere, struck hard, and vanished. They targeted supply lines, fuel depots, communication stations. They avoided major fleet engagements where numbers could tell. Instead, they bled the Dominion slowly, cut by cut, wound by wound. Commander Sam Martinez led the deadliest of these operations. His Shadow Corps had grown from a single team to an entire division, thousands of operators scattered across space. They spoke the enemy language fluently. They wore enemy uniforms. They walked among the enemy population without being noticed. Tonight, Sam was on Prime, the industrial heart of the war machine. The planet produced half of all weapons used by the Dominion fleet. Its factories ran day and night, churning out missiles, fighters, and warship components. In 3 hours, those factories would be gone. Sam moved through the darkness of a maintenance tunnel beneath the planet's largest weapons complex. His team of 12 followed in silence, their footsteps masked by the constant rumble of machinery above. Each operator carried enough explosives to level a city block. "Alpha Team in position," came a whisper through his earpiece. "Bravo Team ready. Charlie Team standing by." Sam checked his chronometer. Timing was everything. The explosions had to be simultaneous, overwhelming the emergency response systems before they could react. "All teams, final check, 30 seconds. He counted down in his head, remembering all the training, all the preparation, all the sacrifices that had led to this moment. His team had spent 6 months infiltrating Prime. 2 of his people had died just getting here. Their sacrifice would not be wasted. Execute. The explosions tore through the night like the fist of an angry god. Factories crumbled. Warehouses burst into flame. Fuel depots detonated in cascading fireballs that lit up the sky for miles. In 30 seconds, years of industrial production disappeared in smoke and fire. But Sam's mission was not finished. As chaos spread across the planet, Shadow Corps agents emerged from hiding and began distributing weapons to the local population. Not to citizens, but to the slaves who worked in their factories. Creatures from a dozen conquered species, kept in bondage for generations, suddenly found themselves holding rifles and explosives. "The humans offer you freedom," the agents told them. "Fight with us and you will never wear chains again." The uprising spread faster than the fires. Slaves turned on their masters. Security forces found themselves fighting on 2 fronts. By dawn, half of Prime was in open rebellion. News of the uprising spread across the galaxy, carried by smugglers and spies. On 100 worlds, other slaves heard what had happened. Other slaves began to dream of freedom. The Dominion, which had stood for 12,000 years, was beginning to crack. Back in human space, Admiral Price coordinated the war from her underground headquarters on Mars. Holographic displays surrounded her, showing the positions of every human ship, every enemy fleet, every contested system. The war had grown beyond anything she had imagined. Casualty report from the Sigma offensive, her aide announced. 12 ships lost, 8,000 dead. Nodded without expression. She had learned to accept losses without flinching. Grief was a luxury she could not afford. Every death hurt, but every death served a purpose. And the enemy losses. 37 ships destroyed. 2 planetary defense stations eliminated. Sigma system is now under human control. It was a good trade, terrible but good. The humans were winning slowly but surely. Every month they pushed deeper into territory. Every month more subject species joined their cause. But the cost was staggering. Doctor worked in a laboratory on Luna, developing new weapons from captured technology. She had not slept in 3 days. Her eyes were red, her hands trembled from too much coffee, but she could not stop. Every improvement she made saved human lives. "The new shield frequency is ready," she announced to her team. "It should reduce weapon effectiveness by 30%. 30%. It did not sound like much, but in war, margins mattered. 30% meant ships that survived. 30% meant soldiers who came home. 30% meant children who got to see their parents again." Lieutenant Commander Maria had survived the first battle, ejecting from her fighter moments before impact. She had spent 6 months recovering from her injuries and then demanded to return to active duty. Now she commanded an entire carrier group, leading the fight on the front lines. Her left arm was mechanical, a replacement for the one she had lost when her escape pod crashed on a controlled moon. She had spent 2 weeks crawling through alien wilderness before rescue arrived. The experience had changed her, made her harder, made her more determined. "All wings prepare for jump," she ordered from the bridge of her carrier, the Defiance. "We hit the enemy supply base in 30 minutes. This time we don't leave until it's ash." The war had taught humanity terrible lessons. They had learned to be ruthless. They had learned to be cruel. They had learned that mercy was a weapon their enemy would use against them. But they had also learned something else. They had learned that they were not alone. Across the galaxy, other species looked to humanity with hope. The consortium of free worlds had grown from a hidden alliance into an open rebellion. Former subjects fought alongside human soldiers, united by their hatred of a common enemy. Supreme Admiral watched his empire crumbling and made a desperate decision. If conventional warfare could not defeat the humans, he would use unconventional methods. The first bioweapon attack came without warning. A human colony world, population 2 million, was infected with a plague engineered to target human biology. Within a week, half the population was dead. Within a month, the planet was lifeless. Received the news in silence. She stared at the casualty figures for a long time, her face empty of expression. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold as space. "They want to play that game," she said. "Fine, we'll play." The human response was swift and terrible. Industrial worlds were bombarded from orbit. Military bases were destroyed without warning. Civilian ships were turned away from neutral ports, left to drift until their life support failed. The war had entered a new phase, a darker phase. Both sides were now willing to do whatever it took to win. And in the darkness between stars, the killing continued. 10 years, 10 long years of blood and fire and death. 10 years that changed the galaxy forever. Supreme Admiral stood in the ruins of his command bunker on the, listening to the distant thunder of human ships bombarding the last defensive positions. The air smelled of smoke and defeat. Around him, the surviving members of his staff waited in silence, their faces showing the exhaustion of a war they had never expected to lose. Outside, the sky burned orange with the wreckage of falling debris. The once proud fleet had been reduced to scattered remnants, hiding in asteroid fields and abandoned systems. The great shipyards that had built armadas for 12,000 years lay in ruins. The empire that had conquered half the galaxy was dying. "Admiral," said his communications officer quietly, "we are receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They are offering terms." Closed his 4 eyes. He had known this moment was coming. He had seen it approaching for months, inevitable as the tide. But knowing did not make it easier to accept. "Put it through," he said. Admiral Price appeared on the. She looked older than when the war began, her hair now completely white, her face lined with the weight of decisions that had cost millions of lives. But her eyes were sharp, and her voice was steady. "Supreme Admiral," she said, "it's over. Your fleet is destroyed. Your armies are defeated. Your subjects have risen against you. Further resistance will only increase the suffering of your people." Stared at her for a long moment. This human, this creature from an insignificant planet around an unremarkable star, had done what no one in the galaxy had ever managed to do. She had broken the Dominion. "What are your terms?" he asked. "Unconditional surrender, immediate cessation of all military operations, full disarmament of remaining forces, war criminals will face trial, subject species will be freed. The Dominion, as a political entity, will cease to exist." "And what of my people? Do you intend to exterminate us as we would have exterminated you?" His expression did not change. "No, we are not you. The people will be allowed to live in peace provided they accept the new order, but the days of dominance are finished." Considered his options. He could continue fighting. He could order his remaining forces to resist until the last ship was destroyed, the last soldier killed. It would accomplish nothing except more death. Or he could accept defeat and save what remained of his people. He was a warrior. He had spent his entire life in service to the Dominion. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to die with honor rather than surrender. But he was also responsible for millions of lives. Lives that would be lost in a futile gesture of defiance. "I accept your terms," he said quietly. "The Dominion surrenders." The formal ceremony took place 3 weeks later aboard the human flagship Unconquerable, in orbit above the. Representatives from every species in the galaxy watched as signed the instrument of surrender. The document was simple, barely a page long, but it marked the end of an era that had lasted 12. Admiral Price signed as the human representative. Beside her stood Ambassador Perkins, who had begun this journey 10 years ago with 4 defiant words. Behind them stood the other heroes of the war. Captain Danny, his hair now gray but his eyes still sharp. Commander Sam Martinez, whose shadow core had struck fear into the hearts of the enemy. Doctor, whose innovations had given humanity the technological edge it needed to win. And Lieutenant Commander Maria, her mechanical arm gleaming in the light, a living symbol of human resilience. When the signing was complete, addressed the assembled representatives. Her words were broadcast to every corner of the galaxy, heard by trillions of beings on thousands of worlds. 10 years ago, the Dominion came to our world with an ultimatum. Submit or die. We chose a third option. We chose to fight. We chose to win. She paused, looking out at the faces of humans and aliens alike. "We did not seek this war. We did not want it. But when it came to us, we did what our species has always done. We adapted. We survived. We overcame." She turned to look at the delegation, broken and humbled. The Dominion believed that strength came from numbers, from weapons, from fear. They were wrong. True strength comes from the will to resist, the courage to stand up for what is right, the determination to keep fighting when all hope seems lost. Straightened her shoulders, her voice growing stronger. "Let this be a lesson to anyone who would threaten Earth or her allies. Humanity is not a species to be conquered. We are not prey. We are not victims, we are survivors, and we will never surrender." The applause that followed echoed through the chamber, a sound of triumph and relief and hope. On Earth, the celebrations lasted for days. People danced in the streets. Fireworks lit up the night sky. Families reunited after years of separation. The weight of war that had pressed down on humanity for a decade finally lifted. But the celebrations were also tinged with sorrow. The cost of victory had been terrible. Tens of millions of humans had died in the conflict. Entire colonies had been destroyed. Worlds that had once been paradise were now wastelands. The war had changed humanity in ways that would take generations to fully understand. Maria returned to her home in New Chicago, a city that had been rebuilt twice during the war. She found her old apartment building had been turned into a memorial for those who had died in the conflict. Names covered every wall, millions of them, each one representing a life cut short. She stood before the memorial for a long time, remembering friends she had lost, pilots who had fought beside her, soldiers who had given everything for victory. Her grandson found her there. He was 7 years old, born in the 3rd year of the war, and he had never known a galaxy at peace. "Grandma, what was the war like?" Maria looked down at him, at his innocent face, at the hope in his eyes. She thought about all the death and destruction she had witnessed. She thought about the terrible things she had done in the name of survival. She thought about the darkness that lived inside her now, a darkness that would never fully go away. "It was hard," she said finally. "Very hard, but we won, and that's what matters." She took his hand and led him away from the memorial, into the bright sunshine of a new day. Across the galaxy, a new order was taking shape. The species that had lived under rule for generations were now free to chart their own course. Some chose isolation, retreating to heal from centuries of oppression. Others joined the growing alliance that formed around humanity, seeing in these strange creatures from Earth a model for their own futures. The consortium of free worlds evolved into something larger, a true galactic government with humanity at its center. Ambassador Perkins became its first leader, guiding the transition from war to peace with the same determination she had shown when facing the ultimatum. Price retired from military service but remained influential in galactic affairs. She wrote a history of the war that became required reading on 1,000 worlds, a testament to what could be achieved when free peoples united against tyranny. Sam Martinez disbanded the Shadow Corps, its mission complete. His operatives scattered across the galaxy, some returning to civilian life, others becoming advisors to newly freed species learning to defend themselves. Danny took command of a deep space exploration fleet, leading humanity's expansion into uncharted territories. The warrior had become an explorer, seeking new worlds instead of new enemies. And continued her research, not in weapons now, but in medicine and technology that could help rebuild what the war had destroyed. Onda lived out his remaining years in quiet exile. He had expected execution, but the humans had surprised him. They were harsh in victory, but not cruel. They demanded justice, but not vengeance. He never understood them. Even at the end, the humans remained a mystery. A species that should have been conquered, that should have been destroyed, had instead become the dominant power in the galaxy. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps some things were not meant to be understood. Perhaps some species were simply born to survive. The galaxy had declared war on humanity. And humanity had answered. Now, looking up at stars that no longer threatened their existence, humans could finally dream of something beyond survival. They could dream of exploration, of discovery, of a future where their children would walk on worlds their ancestors had never imagined. The war was over. The future had begun.